My grandmother said when she was crowned, coronations are a declaration of our hopes for the future. And I know she's up there, fondly keeping an eye on us, and she'll be a very proud mother.
In the heart of Kensington Palace, Prince William uncovered a letter from his late mother, Princess Diana, a message sealed for decades, hidden from the world. As he read her words, raw and unfiltered, he discovered not just a mother's love, but a warning that would shake the monarchy to its core. The truths Diana had fought to keep secret were now spilling into the open, threatening to unravel everything.
Poems, stories, and reviews of plays, until from her pen sprang one of the best loved characters in literature, and certainly everybody's favourite nanny.
In one moment, a family's silence was shattered, and the world would never be the same again. The monarchy's greatest secret was about to be exposed. It was a moment frozen in time, a cold winter morning at Kensington Palace. The soft crackle of the fire in the study barely registered as Prince William sorted through old family items, a task he had put off for months. The room was dim, the only light coming from the pale daylight filtering through the windows, casting long shadows across the room. His fingers moved methodically through boxes filled with old photographs, trinkets from state visits, and keepsakes from his childhood. It was a task he rarely had the time for, but one that he had promised himself to complete. He was determined to finish it by the end of the year. It was the kind of work that seemed mundane in the face of royal duties, yet in its quietness, it carried a certain weight, a sense of duty to preserve the past. Most of the items were routine, innocuous even, a part of the royal archive. But then, as his fingers brushed over the faded leather-bound journal that once belonged to his mother, something stopped him. Inside, tucked carefully between the pages, was an envelope with his name written in his mother's unmistakable handwriting. His heart skipped a beat. The ink was faint from age, but the familiar curve of the letters made the words jump out at him. His breath caught in his throat. He paused for a long moment, just holding the envelope, feeling the weight of it in his hands. The archiving assistant, who had been silently watching from the corner of the room, sensed the shift in William's expression and took a step back, giving him the space he needed. For a few minutes, William remained still, just staring at the envelope. His mind raced. Why had this letter been kept all these years? Why was it addressed to him? And why had it been hidden away for so long? He could almost hear his mother's voice in his head, that soft, reassuring tone that had been such a comforting presence in his life. Yet, as much as he wanted to read it, a feeling of dread began to settle in. What could it possibly say that had remained hidden from him for so long? What secrets had it been guarding? The envelope was sealed, the wax still intact, a small but deliberate barrier between him and whatever message lay inside. His pulse quickened as he turned the envelope over. Written in delicate, careful script were the words, "For William, when the time is right." The familiar handwriting sent a jolt through him. It was a message from his mother, written decades ago. His fingers trembled slightly as he slid a finger beneath the seal, slowly peeling it away. The rustle of paper was almost deafening in the stillness of the room. Inside, he found a single sheet of stationery, the royal crest faint but visible at the top. It had aged over the years, but still looked remarkably like something from another time, another world. The handwriting was unmistakably his mother's, slanted and elegant, just as he remembered. It was almost as if she were right there beside him, her words carrying the weight of a lifetime of experience. He held his breath as his eyes scanned the first line. "My darling William, if you are reading this, then I was right. The truth could not be kept from you forever." The words were simple, yet they held so much meaning. For a moment he stopped, unsure of what to do next. His mind flashed back to his childhood. The memories of his mother were vivid. Her warmth, her laughter, the way she always seemed to understand him without needing to ask. She had always been there, guiding him, supporting him, loving him. But now, reading these words, he realized that something had been hidden from him, something that had been kept from him on purpose. Outside the window, the snow had begun to fall, dusting the gardens with a blanket of white. The flakes clung to the bare branches, and for a moment, time seemed to slow down. The palace itself seemed to hold its breath, as if it too was waiting for what would come next. William could feel the weight of his mother's words pressing down on him. The room felt smaller, quieter, as he turned the page and continued reading. The letter was not just a message of love, it was a warning. As he read, he realized that it was something much more, a confession, a cautionary tale, and at its core, a personal message about Camilla. It wasn't just the words that shook him, it was the realization of what they meant for his life and the future of the royal family. The tone of the letter was clear. Camilla was a force to be reckoned with. His mother's warnings about her were unmistakable. The letter spoke of loyalty, trust, and the dangers that lay ahead, of how power could warp even the most genuine intentions. The letter was not just a personal message. It was a legacy, a guide for William to follow, a map of what to watch for as he stepped into his role. William's hands were trembling by the time he reached the end of the letter. The final line, short yet heavy with meaning, stopped him in his tracks. "When you stand as a man, remember this. Not everyone who smiles beside you wishes you well." The words hung in the air like an unspoken truth that he could no longer ignore. He folded the letter back into its envelope, his mind swirling. He sat there for a long time, unable to move, unsure of what to do with the revelation he had just uncovered. Somewhere deep inside, he knew his life had just changed. The monarchy had just changed. There was no going back now. The world outside continued, indifferent to the weight of the moment that had just unfolded in the quiet of Kensington Palace. Yet, for William, everything had shifted. The letter was not just a relic of the past. It was a harbinger of what was to come. And as he sat in the study, holding the letter close, he realized that the time had come to decide what to do with the truth his mother had entrusted to him. The palace, for all its grandeur and tradition, had always been a place where silence was the norm, where secrets were protected, and the walls that stood around the royal family were impenetrable. But now those walls had cracked, and the truth was spilling through. The unearthed letter was more than just a message from the past. It was the beginning of something new, something that would reverberate through the halls of the palace for years to come. That night, as the palace descended into quiet, Prince William sat alone in his private study. The corridors had grown still. The usual hum of palace life faded into the distance. The only sound in the room was the crackling of the fire in the hearth, casting long, dancing shadows across the walls. He was alone with the letter again, the letter his mother had written so many years ago, now resting on the desk in front of him. Its faint royal crest, a silent reminder of the past. William had read it once earlier in the day, but something told him he needed to read it again. This time, though, he would take his time. There was no rush. The weight of the words demanded to be fully absorbed. The decision to reread it was not taken lightly, but deep down, he knew it was something he could not avoid. He had to understand it, truly understand it, before he could move forward with the knowledge it contained. He poured himself a glass of water, the cool liquid offering a small sense of clarity. Taking a seat in the leather chair by the window, he unfolded the letter once more. The paper had aged over the years, its edges soft and fragile, but the message within was clear. He rested it flat on the desk, smoothing out any creases before letting his eyes move over the first few lines once again. "My darling William, if you are reading this, then my instincts were right. Life in the palace can be a stage where actors don't always reveal the script. I want you to have mine." The words hit him harder this time. His mother had always been a performer in her own way, playing her role as the people's princess, carrying the weight of royal expectations. But behind that public image, there had always been a private person, someone who saw the truth, even when it wasn't visible to others. The truth about the palace, about its politics, its loyalty, and its power plays. For a moment, William's mind drifted back to his own experience growing up in the royal family. He had witnessed it all, the stage smiles, the public appearances, the endless formalities that came with being a part of the monarchy. But as his mother had written, it was all just a performance. The true emotions, the real feelings, often remained hidden behind the curtains. He read on, the words unfolding like a map to the heart of his mother's fears and hopes for him. She wrote not just of her own struggles, but of the things she feared for her sons, the loneliness that she had felt, even while surrounded by people, the isolation that often came with living a life dictated by duty, and the subtle erosion of trust and loyalty that could occur when power, ambition, and the weight of the crown entered the equation. The letter spoke of many things: her love for her sons, her fears for their futures, and her hope that they would not be consumed by the same forces that had shaped so much of her life. But it was what followed that truly gave him pause. It was the part of the letter that spoke directly of Camilla. "I have tried to keep my heart open to those around me, but there are some whose presence carries shadows," the letter continued. "You may one day be asked to accept her as family. If you do, tread carefully. Her charm is a mask, and beneath it lies a will as unyielding as stone. I have felt it press against me, and I fear you will too." William's breath caught in his throat as he read those words. His mother had never been one to mince words, but these were the words of someone who had seen something, felt something, that had unsettled her. Camilla, the woman who would one day become his stepmother, was more than just a figure in the family's complicated history. She was a force, one that his mother had instinctively feared. The warning was clear: Camilla's charm was just a mask, hiding a far more calculating nature beneath the surface. He knew the history between his mother and Camilla had been fraught, but he had always tried to maintain a sense of civility in the face of it. He had worked to bridge the divides, to keep peace, to maintain the public image of a united family. It was the role he had played for years, and it had not been easy. But now, reading his mother's words, it was impossible to ignore the deep-rooted tension she had felt. Camilla was not just a rival, as many had painted her, but someone who posed a threat to everything his mother had believed in: loyalty, trust, and family. William sat back in his chair, the letter still open in front of him. The fire crackled softly behind him, but the room felt cold. His mind was racing. His mother had seen something he had never wanted to acknowledge: the power dynamics at play within the family, the subtle manipulations, the undercurrents of influence that could change the course of history. Diana had understood it, had felt it press against her, just as he felt it now. It was the weight of the monarchy, the unspoken rules, the pressure to maintain unity at all costs, even when it meant sacrificing personal truths. As he reread the next lines, his heart tightened. "When the time comes, you must decide not only what is best for the crown, but what is best for your heart. And remember, love is not always loud. Sometimes it is the quiet insistence to protect what cannot protect itself." The message was clear. He was not just inheriting the crown, he was inheriting a responsibility to protect those who could not protect themselves, to be a leader not only of the monarchy, but of the family. His mother's words were a reminder that love was not always grand gestures or public displays. Sometimes it was the quiet, steadfast resolve to do what was right, even when it went against the tide of public opinion. He paused for a moment, allowing the gravity of the letter to sink in. This was not just a personal message from a mother to her son. It was a manifesto. It was a call to action, one that would echo in his mind for years to come. His mother had written these words decades ago, but they had found their way to him at a time when their meaning could not be ignored. The stakes had never been higher. The weight of the crown, of the monarchy, of the family was now resting on his shoulders. And yet, in the midst of it all, his mother's love and her unwavering commitment to truth shone through. William sat there for what felt like an eternity, staring at the letter in front of him. The room had grown darker, the fire now nothing more than a faint glow in the corner. Outside, the snow had stopped falling, leaving the garden outside still and serene. But inside, William was anything but still. His mind was alive with thoughts of what had just been revealed to him. Somewhere deep inside, he knew he could not keep the letter to himself. The truth it contained was too powerful, too important to be hidden away in the confines of his private study. It was a truth that needed to be shared, not in whispers, but openly and honestly. But to do so would mean risking everything: the peace he had fought to maintain within the royal family, the unity of the monarchy, and perhaps even his relationship with his father, King Charles. Yet, the letter had made one thing clear: truth was worth the cost. As the night stretched on, William knew that this moment, this letter, was not just a glimpse into his mother's heart. It was a turning point. It was a reminder that the monarchy could no longer function in silence, in secrecy, or in denial. It was time to confront the truth, his mother's truth, and, in doing so, to confront his own. He folded the letter carefully, tucking it back into its envelope. But as he did, something shifted inside him. The time for silence had passed. The time for truth had come, and he would not let fear or tradition stand in the way of doing what was right. For now, he would keep the letter close, but deep down he knew it was only a matter of time before the world would hear Diana's words. And when that moment came, it would change everything. The morning after William's second reading of the letter, the weight of his decision felt heavier than ever. The snow had stopped, and the palace grounds were blanketed in a soft, pristine white, the world outside seemingly untouched by the turmoil brewing within the walls of Kensington Palace. William had spent the night wrestling with the contents of the letter, his thoughts swirling with each line his mother had written. The words had taken root in his mind, and now he could not escape them. They called out to him, demanding that he act, demanding that he make sense of a truth that had been hidden for so long. For a few moments, he simply sat at his desk, staring at the envelope in front of him. His mother's handwriting still lingered in his mind, as clear as if she had just spoken the words to him aloud. He could almost hear her voice, steady, loving, yet filled with an undercurrent of warning. This was no ordinary letter. It was a message from beyond the grave, a guide for him to follow, a roadmap to navigate the treacherous waters of the royal family. And at its heart, there was a single figure who had always been a source of tension, the woman who would one day become his stepmother, Camilla. As he read through the letter again, William couldn't help but feel the full weight of his mother's fears. Diana had always been open about her struggles, but this letter revealed the depth of her concerns for the future, particularly regarding his relationship with Camilla. "I have tried to keep my heart open to those around me, but there are some whose presence carries shadows," Diana had written. "You may one day be asked to accept her as family. If you do, tread carefully. Her charm is a mask, and beneath it lies a will as unyielding as stone. I have felt it press against me, and I fear you will too." William had known that his mother had never fully embraced Camilla. He had heard the whispers, the private conversations, the cold stares. But this letter, this unfiltered look into his mother's thoughts, exposed the full extent of Diana's concerns. The way she had phrased it, "tread carefully," was a warning not just about Camilla as a person, but about the power she wielded, the influence she had already begun to exert. Diana had felt it. She had seen the way Camilla could manipulate situations, and she had feared what would happen when Camilla eventually found her place within the royal family. The letter had painted a picture of a woman who was not just charming and capable of winning people over, but a woman with a deep, unyielding will. And beneath that charm, Diana feared there was something far more dangerous, a desire for control, for influence. As a young boy, William had always been told to be polite and to keep the peace. But now, as a grown man, those simple lessons were no longer enough. He was being asked to understand the complexity of human nature, to understand that not everyone who smiled at you was on your side. As he continued to read, William felt the truth of his mother's words settling deeper in his chest. When the time comes, you must decide not only what is best for the crown, but what is best for your heart. Those words echoed in his mind. They weren't just advice about leadership. They were personal, intimate. His mother was asking him to consider his own heart, his own instincts, even if it meant going against the expectations of the crown. It was a message about loyalty, about truth, about the delicate balance between duty and love. Diana had known that the crown would weigh heavily on him, that it would demand sacrifices, that it would test his relationships. But she had also known that love, true love, was not always loud or obvious. Sometimes it was quiet, almost invisible. It was the insistence to protect those who could not protect themselves. The letter was not just a message for the future King of England. It was a manifesto, a call to action, a guide to living a life that balanced duty with compassion, loyalty with love. It wasn't just a mother's plea for her son's happiness. It was a request for him to protect the monarchy, but not at the expense of his own soul. Diana had known that the time would come when William would have to choose between what was best for the crown and what was best for his heart, and she had trusted him to make that choice wisely. William sat back in his chair, taking a long, deep breath. The room around him was quiet, but inside, his thoughts were anything but still. The letter was not just a reminder of his mother's love. It was a reckoning. It was a call to confront the reality of the royal family, to acknowledge the dynamics at play, the power struggles and the sacrifices that would have to be made. And at the heart of it all, the figure of Camilla loomed large. He could no longer ignore the weight of his mother's warnings. He could no longer pretend that everything was fine, that the family dynamics would sort themselves out on their own. This letter was his mother's final gift to him, her truth, her wisdom, and her guidance in navigating the complex world he was about to inherit. It was a truth that could no longer be buried, no matter how hard he tried. But the question remained, what would he do with this truth? How could he reconcile the man he had become with the legacy his mother had left for him? He had always tried to do what was expected of him, maintain the peace, uphold the traditions, protect the monarchy. But now, faced with the full weight of his mother's words, he realized that the time for silence had passed. The time for truth had arrived. The snow outside the palace windows had begun to melt, the once frozen landscape now soft and yielding. But inside, William was anything but malleable. He felt the pull of his mother's words, felt the weight of the choice she had left him with. He could continue to play the role that had been assigned to him, or he could choose something different, something harder, something more personal. But whatever he chose, he knew it would change everything. The monarchy, his family, and his future would be forever altered by the decision he was about to make. For the first time in years, William felt the clarity he had been searching for. His mother's letter had given him the perspective he needed. It wasn't just about protecting the crown. It was about protecting those who could not protect themselves. It wasn't about playing the game. It was about understanding the game, the people involved, and the stakes at hand. And when the time came to make his decision, he would have to remember the one piece of advice his mother had left him. When you stand as a man, remember this: not everyone who smiles beside you wishes you well. He folded the letter carefully and placed it back inside the envelope. It was a small gesture, but it felt like the right one. He wasn't ready to make his decision just yet, but he knew that the time would come. The pressure, the expectation, the history, it all weighed on him. But somewhere deep inside, he knew that when the time came to choose, he would make the right decision. He had to. The truth could not be buried, not anymore. For now, though, he would keep the letter close, as a reminder of the love, the wisdom, and the sacrifice his mother had given him. It was not just a relic of the past, it was a blueprint for the future. A future that he would shape, one choice at a time. And with each choice, he would remember her words, her warnings, and her love. The monarchy had changed. His life had changed. And now, it was time to confront the legacy she had left behind. The days that followed were filled with an unsettling sense of anticipation. William could feel the weight of the letter in his jacket pocket, a constant reminder of the decision that lay before him. It wasn't just a decision about the future of the monarchy or his personal life. It was a decision that would reshape the entire royal family. It was a choice between honoring the legacy his mother had left him or maintaining the status quo, the carefully curated image of unity that had always been expected of him. The tension was palpable, not just in the palace, but in the air itself. The walls seemed to press in on him, and every conversation, every glance, felt loaded with expectation. For days, William had kept the letter to himself. He had read it, reread it, and absorbed its contents. But each time he found himself coming back to the same question. What was he supposed to do with this truth? The revelations it contained were not only about Camilla, but about the entire institution he was a part of. His mother had laid bare the delicate balance of power, loyalty, and love that defined the monarchy. And now he was left with the responsibility of navigating it all. The decision to confront his father, King Charles, had not come easily. William had never been one to act impulsively. He had spent years working to maintain peace within the royal family, trying to keep everything functioning as smoothly as possible. But the letter had changed that. It had made him realize that peace at any cost was no longer an option. The truth had to come out, even if it meant challenging the very foundation of the royal family's unity. On the day of the confrontation, William made his way to Clarence's house. It wasn't a place he often visited for such serious matters. The palace, with its grand halls and formalities, was more familiar to him. But today, the decision to meet with his father in a quieter, more intimate setting seemed right. There were no distractions here, no staff members bustling about, no photographers waiting in the wings. Just him and his father, face to face. He arrived without an entourage, stepping out of the car in a dark overcoat, his jaw set with determination. The usual pleasantries from the aides were absent, as word had already traveled that something was different this time. The meeting was not immediate. William was shown into his father's private study, a room that, like the rest of Clarence's house, exuded a sense of calm. The walls were lined with bookshelves, filled with volumes of history and personal collections. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and leather, the quiet comfort of a space that had always been a refuge for King Charles. He was seated at his desk when William entered, his head slightly bent as he reviewed a stack of official papers. "William," the king greeted, his voice warm but with a hint of surprise as he looked up. His expression shifted the moment he saw the seriousness in his son's face. "What brings you here unannounced?" William closed the door behind him, the soft click of the lock making the room feel smaller, more private. "I need to speak with you alone," he said, his voice steady but laced with an intensity that his father couldn't ignore. Charles waved away the aides, who had been quietly lingering in the background, and they filed out, leaving father and son in the dimly lit room. The silence between them was heavy, each second stretching as William reached into his coat and withdrew the envelope. His father's eyes immediately fell on the handwriting, the unmistakable scrawl of Princess Diana. His face tightened for a brief moment, a flicker of something William couldn't place crossing his father's features. "Where did you get this?" Charles asked quietly, his voice measured, though it carried a hint of concern. It was in one of Mother's journals, William replied, his voice firm but calm. It was meant for me. Charles didn't respond immediately. He simply stared at the envelope, his hand hovering over it for a moment before he slowly reached out and picked it up. There was a momentary hesitation, a sense of caution that filled the room. "I've read it," William said, his voice sharper now, "and I think you need to know what it says." The tension in the room escalated as the king set the envelope down on the desk. The two men stood in silence for a long moment, their eyes locked. Finally, Charles spoke, his tone slightly more defensive now. "Your mother had strong feelings, William. You know as well as I do that the past is complicated." William nodded, his jaw clenched. "It's not the past I'm talking about," he said, his voice steady but with an edge of frustration. "It's the present. It's the influence she warned me about, and it's here right now." The words hung in the air between them, and for a moment, neither man moved. The room felt colder, the weight of their shared history pressing down on both of them. Charles leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping on the armrest, his expression unreadable. "William," the king finally said, his voice slower now, more measured. "The crown is not strengthened by revisiting old wounds. Whatever your mother wrote, it was in a different time, under different circumstances." William shook his head. "She wrote it for a time like this," he said, his voice sharp now. "She knew it would matter when the stakes were highest, and I will not bury it." The room fell silent again, the tension palpable. It was as though the weight of their words was too heavy to bear. Charles exhaled slowly, his eyes briefly closing as if weighing his son's words. When he opened his eyes again, his expression had softened, but there was an undeniable sadness in them. He had known, on some level, that the truth his late wife had written about would eventually surface, but this was not how he had imagined it would come to light. Before either man could speak again, the door to the study opened without warning. Camilla stepped inside, holding a file in her hands. She had clearly expected a routine discussion, but the sight of the letter on the desk immediately stopped her in her tracks. Her eyes flicked from the envelope to William's face, and then to Charles's. "What's going on here?" she asked, her voice cool, but with an underlying tension. Neither William nor Charles answered immediately. The atmosphere in the room had shifted. It was no longer just a conversation between father and son. It was a conversation about secrets, power, and the future of the monarchy. William's eyes never left his father's face as he spoke, his voice unwavering. "It's about the letter," William said. "About what she wrote, about what she saw." Camilla's gaze flickered to the envelope, and she took a slow step forward. Her expression shifted, and for the first time, William could see the vulnerability beneath the surface. But it was brief. In an instant, she composed herself again, her tone sharp and defensive. "This is a private family matter," she said, her voice cool but laced with tension. "It should not be discussed here." William shook his head, frustration mounting. "It is not private anymore," he replied. "This letter belongs to the world now." Charles, sensing the shift in the room, interjected before the conversation could spiral further. "Enough," he said, his voice commanding. "We'll discuss this later." But there was no mistaking the tension that hung in the air between them. Neither William nor Camilla moved, both locked in an unspoken battle for control. The conversation would not end there. By the following morning, the palace was already buzzing with whispers of what had occurred in the private study. The letter had already begun to leak. It started quietly, almost imperceptibly, with a post on a small online forum. A user claimed to have overheard a conversation about a letter from Diana, mentioning Camilla by name. It wasn't much, but it was enough to spark the flames. The rumors spread quickly, and before long, the story was everywhere. Journalists began calling, eager for confirmation, eager for details. And all the while, William remained silent, furious, not because the letter had leaked, but because of the half-truths and speculation that were now circulating. The palace communications team scrambled to control the narrative, but it was already too late. the story had taken on a life of its own. By midday, 2 separate sources had confirmed the existence of the letter. The hashtags began to trend, and the story began to dominate the headlines. The monarchy was under siege, not from scandal or intrigue, but from a truth that had been buried for too long. As the days went on, the pressure mounted. Camilla, furious and humiliated, summoned her senior staff for an emergency meeting. Behind closed doors, she raged at the leak, demanding to know how something so personal had been made public. But even as she tried to control the narrative, she knew that the damage had been done. The words were out, and there was no putting them back. The moment that had started in the quiet of a study in Clarence House had now become a full-scale crisis. The monarchy, once defined by its silence, was now facing a new reality. The truth had found its way out, and there was no turning back. The following days after the leak felt like an endless barrage of questions, rumors, and heightened scrutiny. The once quiet halls of the palace had become a battleground of sorts, each day bringing more public attention and media frenzy. William had made his decision, and the consequences of that choice were now unfolding at an accelerating pace. The whispers in the corridors, the tense meetings behind closed doors, and the public's growing interest in the letter had created a pressure unlike anything he had experienced before. By now, the letter had become a national conversation. People were not just curious about its contents, they were interpreting it, speculating about what it meant for the royal family, for Camilla, and for the monarchy itself. The press had pounced on the story, each outlet taking its own spin on the revelations. Some focused on the raw emotion of Diana's words, while others highlighted the tension between William and his father. But one thing was certain: the letter had sparked a fire that no one could put out. The palace, desperately trying to manage the situation, released a statement, but it was too little, too late. The damage had been done. The hashtag had Diana's letter had gone viral, and the image of William reading his mother's words aloud at the charity gala continued to dominate headlines. The press coverage was relentless, with speculation running rampant about what the future held for the royal family. But amidst it all, one thing was clear: William's courage had forced the monarchy to confront its own truths, something that had been hidden for far too long. The pressure on William was mounting. Every time he stepped outside for a public engagement, microphones were thrust toward him, reporters asking the same questions over and over again. Is the letter real? Does it mention Camilla? Will you release it to the public? His responses were measured, a polite nod or a brief smile, but the silence only fueled the frenzy. He knew that the more he remained silent, the louder the story would become. Inside the palace, the atmosphere was just as tense. Advisors were urging him to let the storm pass, to keep quiet and let the media attention fade. Catherine, ever the supportive partner, stood by his side, reminding him that whatever choice he made, she would support him. But even she knew the gravity of the situation. She had seen firsthand the toll the letter had taken on William. It wasn't just about defending his mother's legacy. It was about the monarchy's future. The tipping point came during a late-night phone call with one of William's closest friends, someone outside the royal bubble who had known Diana personally. William read part of the letter aloud over the phone, his voice thick with emotion as he spoke the words his mother had written. When he finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Finally, his friend spoke, and the words were simple but profound. If she trusted you to have those words when the time was right, then maybe this is the time. That conversation stayed with William, echoing in his mind. It was a validation of the path he had already decided to take. He knew that the time for silence was over. The truth, as his mother had written, could no longer be kept hidden. The moment for it to be spoken aloud had arrived. But the challenge remained. How would he do it? When? And where? The opportunity came sooner than he expected. A charity gala was scheduled for the following week, a cause close to his heart, supporting mental health initiatives for young people, a cause Diana had championed long before it became a common topic in royal circles. The gala was to be televised, a perfect platform for William to share the letter with the world, not as a response to the media frenzy, but on his own terms. As the day of the gala approached, the palace communications team tried to dissuade him from going through with it. They warned him that reading the letter would be seen as a direct attack on Camilla, that it would fracture the monarchy's carefully constructed unity. William listened to their concerns, but his decision was made. This wasn't about destabilizing the monarchy. It was about honoring his mother and telling the truth as it had been written. The evening of the gala, William stood at the podium, surrounded by distinguished guests and dignitaries. The room was filled with light, the soft hum of conversation filling the air. When it was his turn to speak, the crowd's attention turned toward him, and for a moment, there was a heavy stillness in the room. William approached the podium, his expression calm, but anyone who knew him could see the weight of what he was about to do. He began with the usual formalities, thanking the organizers, recognizing the importance of the cause. But then he paused, and the atmosphere in the room shifted. With a deep breath, William reached into his jacket and pulled out the folded letter. He unfolded it slowly, as if gathering the strength to read the words his mother had written. "I want to share something personal," he said, his voice steady, but with an undercurrent of emotion. "Something written many years ago by my mother, Princess Diana. She addressed it to me, but I believe its message belongs to more than one person." The room fell silent. Even the most seasoned attendees seemed to sense that something extraordinary was about to unfold. William's voice carried the weight of the words as he read aloud, each sentence painting a picture of his mother's love, her wisdom, and her deep concerns for the future of the monarchy. As he read about the palace as a stage, about loyalty, and the subtle manipulations at play, the room seemed to tighten. The audience hung on every word, absorbing the power of the truth being revealed. When he reached the final line, the room was utterly still. If you ever feel that truth is being buried, remember that sunlight will always find its way in. Do it with courage. William folded the letter slowly and placed it on the podium. For a long moment, there was no applause, no movement. The room was suspended in time. Then from the back of the room, a single pair of hands began to clap. The sound was soft at first, but it quickly grew into a groundswell, spreading throughout the room until the applause was deafening. It was not the polite, measured applause of a royal event. It was genuine, unrestrained, as if the audience understood the significance of what they had just witnessed. For William, it wasn't a victory. It wasn't about applause. It was about his mother's words being heard and about honoring her legacy. But as the applause continued, he knew that the silence that would follow in the palace, in the press, and behind closed doors would be far louder.